Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Cindy McDonald, and I'm glad to be with you again today. This is another one in our series of interviews with subject matter experts throughout the country. This is for our UCLA Special Issues in Education class or Principles of College Counseling. And today I have with me a very good friend and knowledgeable person, Amy Pimentel from the College of Sequoia. So Amy, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Amy, I know you've worked with a lot of different students in a lot of different capacities. Can you give us a little bit about information about your background and what you're doing now?
Sure. So right now I'm the financial aid outreach specialist for College of the Sequoias, which is a community college in the Central Valley. I've been there for almost a year. Prior to that, I've done a lot in nonprofits. And so I've worked in college access since 2007 and helping a lot of work partnering with schools and districts and helping increase their college enrollment rates and helping families and a lot of first-generation students. I'm also a first-generation college graduate, so I understand how difficult that can be to navigate that process.
And we have a lot of students that fall into that category here in the Central Valley. I know I work with a lot, and I'm sure you do too. Another group of students that we find quite frequently are undocumented students. So can you talk about that a little bit? What does it mean? When somebody says they're an undocumented student, what exactly does that mean?
So what that means on a legal basis or legal way is they basically don't have any legal documentation. So they don't have a visa, they don't have a registration card, they're not, they didn't come here through legal means. Sometimes they'll say, I don't have papers, or they'll say without papers in Spanish. You'll also hear, in probably the last 10 years or so, where students will just say, I'm a dreamer. And so, you know, they don't have a green card, they don't have a residency card. Some people will refer to them as illegal because they didn't come here through legal proper channels. I avoid using the term illegal because I personally don't feel that has a very positive connotation. So that's one thing that when I would say, if you're ever working with students, just try to be mindful to not use that term. But generally you're safe with saying undocumented, dreamer. Those are mostly the two that you'll hear.
And California is one of the few states that actually has the DREAM Act, and that will allow students. Can you explain what the DREAM Act is and what that means for students here in California, or where our students can look at and see, well, what are their states? And that's actually one of the assignments we have in our class. So what does that mean?
So there has been a bill on the national level to have a DREAM Act, but that hasn't passed. So a lot of states, including California, have what's called a DREAM Act application. And so for our students in California, what that DREAM Act application does is it allows them to apply for state financial aid. The DREAM Act on a national level would allow students access to federal Pell Grant money. And federal loans, federal work study, all that federal aid. So the DREAM Act in California entitles students to, when they fill out that application, they're applying for Cal Grants, which is our state aid. So all three of the Cal Grants, A, B, and C, they can qualify for the middle class scholarship. Also starting this school year that just ended, the 15 to 16, the CSUs and UCs have a new Dream Loan program. So they ask on the DREAM Act application, are you interested in a Dream Loan? Because what happens is our kids get to a university and yes, they can get the max, they can get their Cal Grant maybe they have some other scholarships, but they're still lacking. They still have a need.
Right.
And where other students with the same financial situation, they would get a Pell Grant, or they would get a Stafford loan, or they can do work study. The undocumented students don't have that option, and so they struggle, and then it can lead to them dropping out. So now there's this Dream Loan where the students who fill out a DREAM Act application, they can apply for that directly with their financial aid office at a CSU or UC. It also enables them, in California we have a lot of additional student support programs like EOPS or EOP. So EOP&S is at a community college level. We have EOP at a CSU and UC level. And that program provides additional mentorship and advising. And at the community college and CSU level, you can also get additional financial aid if you're part of those programs. So that's, Dreamers, undocumented students who complete their DREAM Act application, they're able to qualify for that. They can qualify for the BOG waiver, which waives all their tuition at a community college. So it really takes the pressure off of students and their families in terms of coming up with the money to pay for their education.
Absolutely, and that's such a concern. And a lot of times students equate, if I'm undocumented, I don't have the legal status, then I can't go to college, and that's just not, it's a little more complicated, but they can still. So one of the questions, and I have a case studies for every one of, on our special issues class, I have case studies every week. And one of our case studies is on undocumented students. And the question is should they fill out the FAFSA? So what do? You do these workshops all over the area. What do you tell students or counselors when you get that question?
In California, they should not fill out the FAFSA. My understanding is in other states, students, they will have a student fill out the FAFSA. So you really want to check by your state, but in California, you should not. Now, or it could be like maybe there's a private college that may want a student to fill it out. They understand that it's going to be rejected by the Department of Education, but they'll use the information to determine institutional aid. So you really want to be in communication with the financial aid office or at a college. And who I would recommend that you ask when you call a college, you may want to first call an admissions office and ask to speak to a residency technician and ask them exactly how is it that they process applications for undocumented students, because some schools that are private schools or some states may process them as an international student. And in California, if you've attended, you've graduated from a California high school or earned a GED, you've had 3 years of a California high school or the equivalent, so done 3 years worth of work, but been in a California school system for 3 years, then you qualify for what's called AB 540, which means you'll get treated as a California resident. You get in-state tuition and all of that, those good perks that come with that. So if you're dealing with a private school or you're outside of California, you want to find out how is it that they code those students. Do they code them as international? Is there any way that they qualify as a state resident? And then with the FAFSA, then your next step would be contacting the financial aid office, and you want to make sure, a lot of times the person answering the phone can be a student or a clerical assistant. So you may just want to kindly ask to speak to a specialist or a director and just make sure that you're getting the correct answer. One thing with the DREAM Act application that started this year is it will ask the student, did you file a FAFSA? And if they say yes, then it gives them instructions on what they need to do so that they can basically pull back their application, because it can cause a mess when they're trying to when financial aid offices are packaging. So you just want to make sure what the process is for your state, and that are the schools that your students are applying to. In California, though, don't fill out the FAFSA. They need to do the DREAM Act application.
Well, and I
they need
think
to do it by March 2nd. It's a hard deadline, that March 2nd deadline for undocumented students. If they do it after, they will not qualify for any aid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's important. And I think overall, it's a much better rule of thumb to say, no, don't fill out the FAFSA unless you hear from a college or organization that says yes. And I know some schools will have students fill out a paper version and submit it. I think that's going to become very limited because I don't know how much longer paper versions are even going to be available. They've got like a worksheet, so families will fill that out. But I would not fill out a FAFSA in any state or region unless if a student is undocumented, unless somebody said, yes, we want you to do that. I think that's, it's a much safer rule of thumb. So now there's a lot of talk about the DACA. So how does that fit into this whole picture with undocumented students?
So DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, what DACA is it provides students who meet certain qualifications. They've been in the country. This is a federal program, so they've been in the country for a certain amount of time, and they meet different, it's a pretty long list of criteria. They can apply for DACA. And what that does is it gives them a Social Security for work purposes only, and protection against deportation. So, and that lasts for 2 years. So every 2 years, this needs to be renewed. So if you have a student, you're not sure if, you're not sure if they're undocumented, or maybe you have a hunch, or, they've not said anything, and you're sitting there and they're like, I'm doing my FAFSA, and you say, make sure you have your Social Security card so we can double check it. And if they've not said anything to you, and you see on the top for work purposes only, or authorization for work purposes only, then that's your biggest clue that Social Security is issued through DACA, or also just be in the process of residency. So that's when you have to, start asking more questions. But what's happened a lot, especially in our communities in the Central Valley, we have a lot of small rural communities, and when DACA came out, there was people going out in the communities and helping families fill out the paperwork, and they weren't giving correct information. So while DACA is helpful because it helps students work, it helps them get jobs, it's protection, it's provided confusion to where we have students who will submit a FAFSA when they should be submitting a DREAM Act application. So if a student has a DACA Social Security number, they should, and they live in California, they should still be doing the DREAM Act application. And it can be a challenge sometimes to get the student and the family to understand that, because they think that it's something different. And so, we'll have students that will submit a FAFSA using their DACA Social Security number, and even after we tell them not to. So you just want to be mindful of that and watch that. Now, and if a student doesn't have a Social Security number at all, that's okay. They can still do the DREAM Act application.
So looking at, because we have this issue not just in California, but nationwide, and we have a lot of people that are actually sending their students from other countries to the United States to go to school. So you brought up a really good point: is, are you an undocumented student or an international student? And that because some states will consider the student, as you said, an international student, and there are some states that actually make it illegal for an undocumented student to go to college, period, which is just beyond me. But so what advice do you give to counselors? What would, these are many people who are coming into this, maybe fairly new or have some experience or may have not experienced with undocumented students. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I mean, with any student in any family, you just, you want to be mindful. I've seen in the last, I mean, I've been working in college access for 9 years now. It's crazy. And I've seen a shift where generally more students and families are more open about their status, just because there are more, we have the DREAM Act, we have DACA, so they know that there's resources out there. But also just keep in mind, a lot of the times, like if the child has DACA, their parents, more than likely, they are not citizens, and the child will want to be very protective of the family. So I always just put it out there right away and say, listen, anything that you tell me or anything that's on this application is protected. It's actually illegal for me to go and share this with immigration. It's illegal for a school to go and share this with immigration. You and your family are protected. I mean, the same thing if a student is a citizen and their parent is not, and they're able to, that student is able to do a FAFSA and the parent's undocumented. You just approach it with that same sensitivity as you do any other group, whether it's learning differences or what have you. And just take the time to familiarize yourself with the resources that are out there. There's a website, Educators for Fair Consideration, or E4 FC.org. They have a lot of great resources for counselors. They'll even do interviews with students to see if there's a way that they can help them get onto a citizenship path. They have a legal team. They have scholarships for students as well. MALDEF, which is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, they have a lot of resources for undocumented students. Also, I think it's important to remember that undocumented students come in from all different countries.
Yep.
So it may not be who you think. I know we have a high school here in Visalia that what they started doing a couple years ago, they use Power School and to track all their students. So they ran a query, and the counselors basically just called every single student in who on their transcript it had said they were born in another country, and asked them their status. So, and just told them, we want to make sure you're filling out the correct financial aid form. So can you tell me your status? And so knowing things like that and approaching it with sensitivity, just as much as you can in terms of arming yourself with those resources. And another thing that I encounter with undocumented students is a lot of times you have undocumented students here living with like an aunt or an uncle, a cousin, yep, and parents are back in the home country. And so always remember it's the same rules in terms of who is a guardian and who is a parent. If a parent went to a notary in their home country and notarized a document saying, I authorize my sister to be the guardian of my son, that does not count as legal guardianship. So if a student is doing a DREAM Act application, or let's say they, we're doing a FAFSA and parents are in another country, you're going to want to convert. They need to still put their parent information for income. Right. And so just use like an online calculator to convert the money to American dollars, and to do those estimates. So that's just something to keep in mind too, that even if they're living here with aunt and uncle, which is very common, they're not putting aunt and uncle's information, right, because it's not a legal guardianship.
Oh, you mean a Post-it note on a child doesn't make them a guardian?
No.
We've had students with that type of thing. Whoever has the Post-it note, that's where the child's legal person is at the moment.
And sometimes the aunt, uncle, whatever, they'll get upset because they've been claiming this, the child on their taxes. And I reassure them, you can still claim him or her on your taxes. That's fine. That has no bearing. Right. But we cannot use your information on the DREAM Act application.
Right. Right. So if my students need to get a hold of you, how do they do that, Amy?
Probably the best way, if it's if it's in the next, I don't know, 2 months.
It'll be after that.
Oh, okay. Probably the best way is you can get a hold of me through my COS information, which is Amy, AMYPI @cos.edu. My phone number is 559-737-6178. I also have my personal email, which is my Gmail account, my pimentel.amy23@gmail.com is also a way to get a hold of me.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I know people will really appreciate hearing firsthand, what the experiences are and how to help students. So it's very much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.